Hello, everybody. And hello. Oh, so friendly. Welcome to the Alice McKay Room at the Vancouver Public Library. My name is Dylan Schroeder, and I work here in the cultural programming team. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm a settler in these lands, which means I feel a responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in the place I call home, and to take sincere actions towards decolonization, especially in my work as a public servant. It is great to see you here all tonight on another of this year's Incite series, especially on this beautiful spring evening. We are very grateful to the Vancouver Writers Festival for this partnership, which brings the most exciting writers right here to your library. We've had a great run of this series so far, so show of hands, who is here for their first Incite event ever? Wow, most of you, okay, amazing. And who's here for a second or third or fourth time this year? Yes, love to see it, amazing. Before I pass things over to Leslie, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, I'm just going to do a little announcement of an event that we have coming up on June 16th. This is a breaking news special preview for you all. We are going to be doing a live stream of Elliot Page's conversation that he's doing at the Toronto International Film Festival for his new memoir, Page Boy. That will be up in the Montebello Theatre upstairs, and it will be live as it's happening in Toronto. We'll have it happening here, and we're going to be doing some Pride trivia and giving away some copies of the book. And that's on June 16th. And the trivia will be at about 3, and then the live stream will start at 4. So put it in all of your calendars, because that's going to be an amazing opportunity. Some other housekeeping notes. If you need to exit the room during the event, please use either of those doors. You can leave and re-enter at any time. The closest washrooms are located right to the right around the corner. And please take the moment right now to silence your phones. You do not want to be the one publicly shamed by everybody else in the audience, so this is me helping you. You can keep them turned on and take video and post pics and tell everybody you're at this amazing event here at VPL. Just please make sure they are not making noise. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass the torch to Leslie Hertig, who is the Artistic Director of the Vancouver Writers Festival.
Hello, everybody. It's so great that you could join us here tonight, and it is a beautiful night out there, but it's also a beautiful night in here, and we're very glad to have you. Welcome to our viewers at home as well. We are live streaming this event tonight. Two of my favorite authors are here with us tonight. I'm so pleased to be welcoming Casey Plett and Hazel Jane Plante for conversation with the Vancouver Public Library's very own celebrated author, Candy Tanaka. A big shout out to our friends at Arsenal Pulp Press for making this event possible here tonight. And they helped us to get Casey and Hazel here. So thank you, Arsenal Pulp. Thank you also, yes, yeah. Thank you also to our wonderful Incite event partner, the Vancouver Public Library, for their collaboration and support. Also, a great thanks to our public sector funders that make events like this one possible: the Government of Canada, the BC Government, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island. Just a reminder, as Dylan already said, Incite runs every other Wednesday night. Our last event of the year is happening on May the 31st, and that is with nonfiction author John Valiant with his brand new and terribly prescient book, Fire Weather. So please join us for that one. He'll be in conversation, by the way, with CBC's Laura Lynch. The format for tonight is fairly straightforward. Casey and Hazel will be talking with Candy for just under an hour before turning things over to you, our audience, to ask a few questions, and to our viewers at home as well. As always, we love it when you put your questions in the form of a question. That's very helpful. Following the conversation this evening, our authors will be signing copies of their beautiful new books, courtesy of our official bookseller, Black Bond Book Warehouse, over here. Yes. And now to introduce our guests this evening. Our moderator tonight is Candy Tanaka. They are a trans writer, challenging the binaries continually reconstructed between self and other in literary fiction. Their works explore archive and memory in a futuristic context. They are in the final revisions of a first novel. That's very exciting, Candy. And are working on a manuscript as well as penning a suite of poems about working on the waterfront. They have published work with Anvil Press, Guernica Editions, and Orca Book Publishers, and their latest YA novel is called Baby Drag. I believe it's for sale over here. Casey Plett is the author of the novel Little Fish and the short story collections A Dream of a Woman and a beautiful reissue of A Safe Girl to Love, along with editing several anthologies. She's written for McSweeney's Internet Tendency, The New York Times, Maclean's, The Walrus, and other publications. She's the winner of 2 Lambda Literary Awards for transgender fiction, winner of the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, and she received an Honor of Distinction from the Writers' Trust of Canada's Dane Ogilvie Prize for LGBTQ Emerging Writers. She is visiting us from Windsor/New York. I got that right. Hazel Jane Plante is a librarian, musician, coastal creature, and writer. Her debut novel, Little Blue Encyclopedia, for Vivian, received a Lambda Literary Award and was a finalist for both a Publishing Triangle Award and a BC and Yukon Book Prize. She visits us tonight with her second novel, Any Other City. She releases solo music under the name of Lo-Fi Lioness, hosted a podcast about writing while trans called T4T, and lives with her gorgeous cat, Gus. I wish she had brought him here tonight, on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Please welcome Hazel and Casey and Candy.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie, for that introduction. I would like to recognize today, of course, May 17th, as the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. In case you didn't know, this day was chosen to commemorate the decision to remove homosexuality from the International Classification of Diseases of the World Health Organization in 1990. The goal is to raise awareness of violence, discrimination, and repression of queer communities worldwide, and is an opportunity to take action and engage in dialogue with one another, like tonight. Another thing to note, as Leslie mentioned earlier, Hazel and Casey will be taking questions from both the in-person and online audiences tonight. So please remember to keep your questions respectful and kind. We'll make sure there's around 20 minutes at the end for audience questions. I know that everyone is excited about having them both here with us tonight. So let's get started. I believe this is the last stop of your 7-city tour of the US and Canada. You're in Toronto, New York, Baltimore, Chicago, Madison, Calgary, and now Vancouver. How are you both feeling? And can you share a story of something unique or funny that happened to you along the way?
I feel like $1 million. Everything's great. No. That's all been. It's all's well. It has been a long couple of weeks, but but it's also been really exciting. It's been very energizing, very invigorating, I think. So, yeah. Hazel?
Yeah, I've never really been on. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'd never really been on tour before. It's kind of the thing of it sounds incredibly exciting and dramatic, and it kind of is those things, but then it's also explaining to someone, it's a lot of it is traveling for 5 hours a day and not having lunch and things like that, but then the events are always amazing. Yeah. I think Baltimore, you're asking about specific, unique, interesting things, I was looking at the itinerary and I was I don't know about Baltimore. What's Baltimore going to be like? I don't know anybody in Baltimore. How come we're not going to other places? And then Baltimore was amazing. And there was a contingent of folks who drove from DC.
Yeah, that was super cool.
That was so lovely.
Super cool. Yeah, I remember someone was oh, it's a rental. You rented a car to come see me? Why would you do that? But that's so cool. It was so neat. Yeah, that's how it happens. Yeah, that was really touching.
Yeah, and I feel like there was something like that, similar-ish to that in every city or every couple cities or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it was worth it.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other thing that happened. So in Chicago, I was going to sign a book, the first book, and then I didn't have a signing pen. And I was like, oh, and then this girl, Liz, was like, oh, you can use mine. I have. I was like, okay, great, I sign it. And then I saw it was like this old kind of like retro red pen that was like a couple decades old, and it was from a chain of adult superstores in Texas. It's really quite the object. I was like, oh, yeah, I was like commenting on that, and then like there's a long line, and all of a sudden I was wait, she left. I don't have her. So now it's my new signing pen. I had it with me tonight, actually. I can if you want it,
This is a great
Yeah.
incentive for people to remember to buy your book.
See, yeah,
after the
yeah,
event.
that's right. Liz from Chicago, if you somehow you can hear me, I will give your pen back at some point.
Down the road.
Exactly. In the meantime, I'm going to sign lots of books with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love those stories, so thanks for sharing with us. The title of the event tonight is Love Lives or Love Lives. I love how they're both noun and verb at the same time. I think that's maybe called a homonym. I'm not 100% sure. But throughout the evening, we're going to talk about some of our favorite subjects: love, friendships, pleasure, sex, and art, and how they relate to writing. And we'll get to as many of them as we can. So let's, of course, start off with love, right? Now, I think, I could be wrong, but I think there's actually 3 big romantics here on the stage right now, hopefully, from what I've read in your books. Now, for instance, Hazel, you have Tracy buying 20 gifts, one for each year of her partner's life in one of your books, saying that she's a hopeless romantic, and that's actually in any other city. One thing that I want to mention here, a quote from Bell Hooks, who's one of my favorite writers, in her book, All About Love. She says, "Redeemed and restored, love returns us to the promise of everlasting life. When we love, we can let our heart speak." I think that for both of you in your writing, that's what we get to experience and what you share with us. We get to hear your heart speak. So now we all know that love is messy, but how have you defined what love is for you? Is there anything in the world you value more than love? And how do you portray love in fiction without it sounding too rom-com-y? And I just want to say too that it was a pleasure to read about all the different kinds of trans love in your stories. So thank you for that.
Dang, do you want to go first? Right?
Wow, love is a hard one. Yeah, I mean, when I think about love, I think about a lot of folks who have written about love, and I think about all of the different sort of like ways that love can figure into our lives. And it's also one of these things, most of this book, actually this entire book, didn't start being written until the pandemic hit. And I think around that time, I especially noticed myself whenever I would be like talking with friends, like in person or from a distance or whatever, I found myself increasingly at the end of a conversation just saying like, just so you know, I love you, right? It just felt really deeply important to me. And I was like, why was I withholding that before? Like there's nothing to be gained by kind of holding that inside of myself. And one of the people I think about related to like love a lot is Yoko Ono, who is someone who I find myself like increasingly like turning to as kind of like someone who has things to teach me about like making art and like living in the world. And she wrote this essay that I feel like I'm quoting all the time in 1973, so literally 50 years ago, when she was one of the most hated people in the world. I mean, people probably wouldn't like you if they thought you broke up the Beatles, and things like racism, misogyny exist in the world, and people are like, you don't know how to sing, all of these sort of things. But she wrote this essay where she was like, one of the things she said is, people say that I have been a hate object for the world, but I don't believe that. We don't live long enough to actually hate. You know, we spit on people when we want to hug them or be held by them. Hate is just an awkward way of love. And she kind of ends the essay by saying something along the lines of, everything is foreplay to get to love, right? And I mean, it feels kind of like, so I don't know that there's anything that feels more important or vital to me in a way. Like if I think of the stuff that this cosmos is made of, I don't know that I would say it's made of anything other than potentially like love that kind of gets messed up and kind of fucked up in a whole bunch of different ways. But it feels like really the stuff of like kind of why we're here tonight and why we're in our bodies in a way. I don't know. And it's a lot of, messiness to kind of get to there and to be able to kind of like see that and to sit with that and to be able to sit with a lot of other things too and to remember that's there. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because like you, the first thing he says, like, do I write about love? Is that like a thing? Is that my book? It's like, oh, love in the title of the book. Like, dang, okay, maybe. But I do. I think I find myself often in all of my books being driven to sort of like examine these like questions of love in terms of like sort of like acts of service or dedication, are ways in which like love is expressed in these sort of like very kind of like quiet beneath the surface sort of fashions. And I think I maybe, and this actually maybe even like is representative of how I like wasn't sure what you meant at first, but like these characters who are loving other people in ways they maybe don't even recognize or wouldn't even know how to name as love. The story that I'm going to read from Winning is about these two trans women, one of whom is older and like transitioned in like the 80s and is the biological mother of the younger one. And I think in both of them, they have actually like a very conflicted relationship with each other, and they have a very like tough relationship with each other. And a lot of them is them both sort of like, I would say, kind of like showing love to each other, even though that's like not a word they would use and it's not a phrase they would use. This maybe ties into like Mennonite stuff, because I feel like I've also spent like a lot of my fiction. So I come from a Mennonite background. It's complicated, but I feel like I've spent a lot of my like fictional work trying to like explore and kind of like think about those things of Mennoniteness, which definitely there is like an enormous culture where like like saying I love you is like, whoa there, Turbo, like hold on. And so I found, I don't know, I think I actually kind of like find it moving that you have read that book in that context, because I wouldn't have always thought about it as I was writing it, but like you're right.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I just felt the love throughout, all of your books, so it was just so evident to me. So that's why I thought, okay, we have to start with that.
That's really cool.
And
Thank you.
like you said, though, I think it's like it's under the surface. But it's there, and it's really strong, and I feel it's passionate in both of your works. So I really do appreciate it, and it's so nice to see it in fiction for trans writers, because we don't see that very often. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Now let's talk about friendships, because friendships are so another theme that's like huge in all of your writing. So it's something that's really important. Again, I'm going to talk about Bell Hooks, but she says that often we take friendships for granted, even when they are the interactions where we experience mutual pleasure. We place them in a secondary position, especially in relation to romantic bonds. And I feel that neither of you do that in any of your writing, and that friendship is portrayed almost with an equivalency of at least romantic love. How do you ensure that you maintain these close friendships, like on a personal level over the years, and what are ways that you sort of portray that in your writing? I think with Casey in your How to Stay Friends, I thought that was a really interesting story about a recently transitioned trans woman named Minerva who meets with a cis ex-girlfriend for dinner, seeing her for the first time since she's transitioned. And there's just a lot of thought about friendships in all of your work. Do you sometimes find that there's this shifting nature of boundaries and barriers that can be exhausting, when you're code switching sometimes, like in friendships?
Yes.
I shouldn't have done that as a yes or no question. Can you expand on that, please?
Okay. Yeah, and I think actually, here's this. I do have a more substantive answer to that. I think there is a degree to which that is sort of like not even like I think we sometimes like think about these things like the way that Minerva is trying to negotiate, like talking with her ex, is she's trying to sort of like kind of like do these sort of like mental equations, and certainly there's a degree to it. There's a sort of like, and I think I maybe want to suggest that there is actually kind of something like loving about that again. Like I think there's some certain degree where it's like it's easy to read those things like, oh, it's she has to like talk this way around like this person she's close to, isn't that sad? Like, yeah, I guess maybe like a little bit, but also there's something like, we all bring different parts of ourselves to different friendships, and we all like draw out different parts of ourselves, and we highlight some things and we don't highlight others, and we talk one way around some people and we don't talk that way around others, and that's like fine, that's good, that's kind of like I think kind of like a healthy way to be in a lot of ways, So in a way it is kind of like sort of sad, because this girl Minerva is like in this very kind of like, she's like going through a hard time. She's definitely like, not, I would say, in like a good mental space in her life. And it is sort of sad a bit to a degree what she is like having to negotiate and talking with her ex, but it's also a way to ensure that it's like going to last, that it is like real, you know? I mean, like, and I don't think there is anything actually bad or wrong about that. It's like figuring out a way to kind of like be and have these relationships like last in the world. And there is like something really lovely about that. The optimistic, even though that story is kind of like sad in a lot of ways, I like to think that they are like, probably going to like still be very good friends in like a decade or so. And that will be part and parcel of it. Yeah, does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, no, it totally did.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
There's a sense of tenderness I picked up from that story. So, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, friendship-wise, I think when I think about it in a way, Any Other City is sort of a book in part thinking about like not really making romantic love the center of it in a way. I think it kind of starts out that way, and I think like one of the phrases in the synopsis of the book is something like it's about friendship and other forms of love. And I think it's increasingly that kind of feeling of this distributed sense of love, right? Which sometimes is, again, very messy and like takes a bunch of work. And I don't know, but there's so much that can be gained. And I think, yeah, part of it too is that idea too of, I think, where we're like really different with different folks. And we get to bring out really different aspects of ourselves. Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, this writing over of this kind of palimpsesty kind of thing I was trying to do with this book, in a way, was kind of like interrogating for myself, like my ideas of like romantic love. And like, I will say something I don't think I've said in any other place or whatever, but like, the narrator's her first name is Tracy, which was the first person I ever had a huge crush on when I was 5 years old. I still have the Valentine she gave me, like literally.
What?
Like,
That is so cool!
I was like such
God.
but I think it was being such a romantic because like everything else in my life was chaotic. And there was that idea, if I had romantic love, even at that age, that maybe that comes from like films and stuff, I really don't know. But like I remember like having this massive crush on her, and I remember the Valentine that I gave her, I was like, I'm probably being too forward because I'm giving her the Hamburglar. Like, she will know how into I am. My fingerprints are all over this romantic gesture of the Hamburglar. It didn't become anything when I was 5. And then the second girl I had a big crush on, her last name was St. Cyr, which is also in here. That was when I was 10. And those are huge and kind of like felt really monolithic. Those love, this idea of love or whatever. But I think it's that thing, aging and kind of realizing like, oh, there are all these different ways of experiencing love with folks besides romantic love. And I think in a way this book is trying to think of the ways we can kind of like have really full lives with a whole bunch of different folks in our lives instead of centering everything around one person. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah,
It totally makes sense. And now I think we're going to ask Casey to do a reading, if you're ready.
I am.
And this will be from A Safe Girl to Love, Casey's literary debut short story collection. A new edition is out now, and it includes an afterword. So if you haven't picked it up, again, it's available over at the bookseller's table.
Having 2 copies is great because then you can have one like in your car and like one in your house.
it's so good. You need a couple.
Yeah.
I think you want to read it out loud with a lover or a friend or a group of people.
Yeah, like you never know, and all of a sudden there's gonna be like 8 people in your house, and like everyone needs one to follow
It's like
along,
Shakespeare
right?
or something like
Basically,
this.
pretty much. Yeah.
Do you take a character? You take a character. Look under your seat. Everybody's got a
doesn't
character.
that sound fun?
Yeah.
I think that sounds fun. Exactly.
Yes.
And then each one of them can be signed with the adult superstore pen. There you go. Okay. This is from as I mentioned before, this is from a story called Winning. He's shivering, Zoe thought, as she came in Robin's bedroom and saw his tall body vibrating on the bed, blanket on the floor. She made to tuck the blanket back over him when she saw his face was contorted and his lips were moving like waves. She said, "Hey," and softly rocked his shoulder. Robin gasped, and his face turned instantly blithe. "Hey," she said, "sorry to wake you." "It's okay," he said. He stretched, and his boxers made a ruffling noise on the sheets. "You leaving?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Thanks for letting me crash." "Definitely." "Boy," he yawned, I feel fucked up. Robin had finished most of a magnum last night. Zoe had had 2 glasses, then switched to milk. She loved milk. She giggled and said, "Aw," and mussed his wavy brown hair. It was silly, she realized. It was so stupid, but somehow she had forgotten how boys had nightmares. It was mid-November when in the Pacific Northwest, the panorama of clouds stopped flirting with the sky and moved in and set parking brakes until May. A soft mist patter of rain was coming down as Zoe walked down the motel-like stairs of Robin's complex, then over to Eugene Station to take the 66 north. Back at her mom's, the boxes in the kitchen hadn't moved. There was a note on the counter. "Gone to the farmer's market one last time. I need everything out of your room tonight." Well, that was a new request. She thought she still had a week to stay here, but whatever. She went into her room and resumed clearing out her shit. You can build up so much stuff, she thought, when you have a room in a house you don't actually live in. And Zoe, she'd always been a pack rat. Like, even as a teenager, especially as a teenager, she would save all these things that she thought that regular families saved for their kids. She dumped most of that stuff now, though, and there were only a few boxes left, orderly seas of social studies papers, choir programs, stuff like that. Sandy came home as Zoe was mashing a basketball-sized paper wad into the recycling, and Sandy said, "I bought some fruit for you," and Zoe said, "I'm not hungry," and Sandy said, "Don't give me that. Have you eaten?" And Zoe said, "I don't want any fruit, thanks." Sandy put her elbows beside a bag of pears and massaged her eyes and said, "Better to tell me the truth, don't you think?" Ever since Zoe transitioned, Sandy had become convinced that her daughter would develop an eating disorder, though Zoe was eating as little as ever. And Zoe said, "No thanks, Mom, I'm not hungry." And Sandy said, "Zoe, it's not like I like having this conversation." Sandy was trans, too. Zoe had come out to her exactly 18 months ago on the phone from her Brooklyn apartment. After she had already been on hormones for a while, she had meticulously taken steps to avoid telling Sandy, and when she did, her mother had cried and cried. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that story. I did want to ask you, though, a question about another story in the book, the one that's called Not Bleak, about Carla, who is a trans woman with her partner Liam in a small Midwestern town near the Canadian border. They take in queers that need a place to stay and end up meeting a Mennonite trans girl named Zeke, who may or may not have stolen Carla's hormones and passport, which I'm not going to reveal, and you can read it in the book. But what's really interesting, again, buy the book. What's really interesting is that let's talk about growing up in a small town. You grew up in Morden, Manitoba, which is a population now of around 10,000 people. What are some ways that
6 when I was a kid. It's really moving up there. Yeah, buddy.
I should have taken look at the horse historical population.
No, you're a librarian. Come on.
But what are the ways that growing up in a small town has influenced your writing? I think that there seems to be this sort of sense of disbelief when you sometimes go back to a small town, of the people perhaps not changing much. I mean, there's no judgment there, but as to whether that's good or bad. I'm saying this too because I grew up in a small town as well, Tawasin, which is maybe double the population of what your small town is now. But I'm just wondering, did that influence your writing? And
yeah, I think so, and I think actually something that has majorly been something I think about a lot is the relativity of those even terms. So I moved away. I didn't grow up completely in Morden. I moved away when I was 11 to this college town in the U.S., Eugene, which is where Winnie is set. When Eugene has a population of around 150,000 people. When we moved there when I was 11, we were like, holy fuck, this place is so big. There's all this shit. It's amazing, And my mom, my mom and my stepdad, they both grew up in villages in southern Manitoba that are of 100 people, and I even remember being a kid in Morden and being like, well, this isn't a small town. It's a medium-sized town, Like Thornhill over there, that's a small town, And I remember, I don't know, I was 11 or 12, and I was like, oh my God, And then when we left, I remember when my mother left Eugene when she moved away to the Portland area, but like, I don't know, after living in Eugene for like 15 years or something like that. And by that time she was starting to call Eugene a small town. And I find it interesting the ways in which we kind of like think about these terms and use these terms and like the relativity of them. Again, I really remember when I was a kid, I was like, well, I mean, God, it's not that small. Like, look at Thornhill, Sorry, I'm sure no one here is from Thornhill, Manitoba. If there is, I'm extremely apologetic. Brian Giesbrecht, tell him hello. Anyway, but I do. I do find fascinating these sort of like questions of like stasis and change. Like, for example, like I moved back to Winnipeg when I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't even need a map to get around. Everything is still the same. There is nothing that has changed. And southern Manitoba, honestly, has gone through like a big population boom. Like that's actually like the small towns of Manitoba actually look a lot different to me than does the like capital city that is like 700,000 people. I don't know if there's any that really answers your question at all, but I do like. I would say it has influenced me greatly, yes. I'm not really sure how I can sort of like articulate how.
Okay.
Yeah. You can feel free to ask me a follow-up question if you want. I'm happy to talk about this.
We'll like let it sit for a
Sure,
bit. How
okay.
about that?
Yeah.
So this is a craft question for both of you, but I am referencing, again, Not Bleak with Carla and Zeke, when they're talking about Infinite Jest by our favorite David Foster Wallace, which I must admit I have not read.
You got like a good like few months of your life that I don't, so. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
We apologize to DFW fans worldwide. But what's interesting, when they were discussing about the portrayal of trans characters in the book, Zeke says that she doesn't mind seeing terrible trans characters vilified, even though they're trans.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't know why she doesn't care, but she doesn't. In what ways do you both feel sometimes a little pressure to portray trans characters as sometimes inherently good in your writing, because trans people at times are so often vilified or othered in the real world? And how do you sort of go about writing around that and sort of through that?
I've been talking a lot. Do you want to take this first?
Sure, I'll start it out. This also feels like kind of a continuation of a conversation last night a little bit after the event of talking about writing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about, I don't know, I think it's necessary and important to be willing to write characters who are messy and like instead of this like perfect, I don't even know, I don't think that's compelling or interesting or real in a way. Like, I mean, I've definitely been writing stuff and then suddenly things take a turn and then I'm like, oh, this person is different than I thought they were. Right, I remember that with like Little Blue very much, the character Vivian, where there were certain things about her where I was like, oh wow, she's actually kind of shittier to the narrator than I thought she was, right? And I remember being like, oh, I felt a little bit of a pinch there, but then I was like, but that's also useful and important, and that's the ways the relationships that I'm familiar with feel like. Like there's always, I feel like I've had more than one or two people comment on something specific in that book to do with like power dynamics in friendships, which you almost never acknowledge. Like sometimes someone has a lot more power than someone else, and this person is willing to like take a certain amount of like haha ridicule that maybe they actually don't really enjoy that much in order to kind of maintain a certain friendship or whatever. And I think it's important to be able to have characters who are like messy and smart and hilarious and like really hot and all of these things. And I think like I remember reading like A Safe Girl to Love, which I feel like I don't know if I've told you this exact thing, but that the nice thing about a collection of short stories is we get all of these peeps into different lives, right? And I've definitely quoted to you this thing I wrote recently about seeing that novel as like a porthole that can also function as a portal.
Thank you.
Into these lives here, right? And a glimpse into like different sorts of relationships that I would have with different folks, right? And sometimes you're like, this person is really like hilarious and brilliant, but also really cutting, you know, and like, and there are lots of reasons we take the shapes that we take, right? I mean, I'm definitely very aware of the ways that we're able to kind of survive in the world, and sometimes those things don't serve us once we reach a certain age, and it takes a lot of work to kind of be able to move through those things. But I don't think there's any value in having, I don't know, characters who actually don't look anything like the real world, and actually, I don't know, we should be able to have characters who are trans who are like super shitty.
Yeah.
You know, like that's important to have like a trans, like I remember someone who was like writing a book that didn't get published, another trans writer who I really loved, that was about like an assassin who happens to be a trans girl or whatever. And it's like, want those kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Or people who are just, yeah, I don't know. Like some sort of like Weekend at Bernie's, but one of the people is trans. Amazing. Let's fund it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like, what's the point? I don't know. Like, what's the point of having like fiction or like doing this kind of work if you're not going to have people who can be like really crappy to each other and be like that's interesting, right? You know, I mean, like, I don't need to see like everyone being like these like perfect figurines. Like that's so uninteresting. Like, I don't go to art for that kind of stuff. And I think I also remember too. A big thing for me, I was working on a story in A Safe Girl to Love, and my friend Kat, who's now my business partner, kind of like literary partner in crime, I was just meeting her at this point. She said, "This character's too cool. She's like too poised. She's always got an answer. She's like always got like she's too cool." I'm not going to tell you what story it is. And I was like, "Oh, that's right. She is too cool." Because I was like, "Yeah, this girl is like it's funny and like kind of always like really snappy, you know." And it's like, "Oh yeah, she's too cool." And I just think that like. Yeah, and I wouldn't even necessarily say I feel a lot of pressure. I might have like very early on in my career, and also like 12 years ago. I mean, I feel like the state of trans art was a very there's the conversations that we're having now like are. Well, I mean, they exist and like they're really like intense for one, and like those conversations weren't even. I wasn't. Where they were occurring were not places I was privy to, so like I don't even feel like that's something like a pressure I even like feel a lot anymore, which I'm very happy about. But I also think that like about Zeke and Carla in there was interesting, and I actually love Infinite Jest. I actually like do kind of really like that book. There's like problems with it for sure, but I do like it. And the funny thing is, so there's two transish characters in that book, and one of them is like Helen Steepley is like weird. There's like something weird going on. I was like, "David, do you have something you wanted? Was there something you wanted to tell us?" Like, but there's another one. I think it's Poor Tony, who's like kind of rule, and like the character is meant to be vilified. The character's meant to be bad, but like the character kind of rules. It's like, it's like, yeah, like go you. Like it's kind of fun. To the point to get to the part that you quoted with Zeke and Carla. I think Carla has a very kind of like political analysis about these things, whereas like these characters are being used for like, and they're like very cogent. Whereas like these characters are meant to serve a kind of like purpose. Like they are not actually real people. They are like written poorly. They are not three-dimensional. They are meant to serve as kind of like things that which I believe, and I personally would have like written about this too. You know, when like you have these like trans characters that are very like two-dimensional and show up to kind of like symbolize something as opposed to being like a real messy human, for sure. But I'm also sometimes fascinated by sometimes I watch it. I was like, yeah, I know this is bad. I don't care. I just don't give a shit. Which I think is the case with Zeke, where she's just like, I'm sorry, I know maybe I should care about this, but I just don't. And I find that really fascinating too, you know, when you can sometimes like consume certain types of art, and you can even kind of be like, okay, like I have this like politically, I know this is true, I know this is the case, like I kind of should have a problem with this. I don't give a shit. I find something really interesting about that, especially when it's like, you know, it is like about a marginalization that affects you in real life. I think there's something fascinating about that really intrigues me, and that was the case with Zeke.
Great.
Yeah, does that answer your
Thanks.
question?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Fascinating is actually one of my favorite words, so I'm glad you brought that up. Now, I want to give Hazel a chance to read From Any Other City, which is a two-sided fictional memoir by Tracy St, who helms the indie rock band Static Saints. And there's two sides to the story, side A and side B. And take it away, Hazel, when you're ready.
Thanks, Candy. I'm going to read something that I think I've only read it once, somewhere, maybe in New York or something like this. And it includes a song, is one of the things that it includes. A song called Tigerfish Kisses, which I'm just going to give like a shout out because Publication Studio Vancouver is over there in the corner also selling copies of this little book that they printed that is like so gorgeous, called Songs of Love, Death, and Pleasure. That includes a number of songs that are in here and other songs that I was playing with my band and solo songs and things like this. And it just has the blue on the edges. Really gorgeous. So it's a song called Tigerfish Kisses. And I will say one thing before I read it, which is it includes some sex in it. But I think sometimes sex is also really interesting to me too because it's about more than one thing, right? I mean, we can hold things related to sex, but also like anger or sadness or these kind of things, and I think it kind of points towards some of that. The first love song I wrote for you was called Tigerfish Kisses, about your prowess at giving me orgasms and your love of marine organisms. And these are the lyrics for the song. I used to live in a basement suite. Now I live for sweet debasement. Oh, now I live for sweet debasement. I come alive like Frampton for you, for you. I shimmer like sea fire plankton for you, for you. I adore your tigerfish kisses. I want more of your tigerfish kisses. I love when your trigger finger squeezes. I melt into jelly around you, around you. Oh, how my knees buckle for you, for you. After we started dating, you added a drink to the menu as a tribute to me, the ecstatic saint. Old Forester bourbon, Benedictine, yellow chartreuse, lemon, ginger, and egg white. You became the handsome tomboy of my wettest dreams, the dyke in leather overalls who wooed me by lugging my gear to gigs, who whisked me to a weekend sex cabin, and who tried to make a life with me. For quite some time, you put the tender in bartender. After I got FFS, your tenderness started to taper, but I knew how much you still loved me. I knew you'd do anything for me. So I tried to make it work. We saw a few therapists. Things would get better for a bit before reverting to how they had been. Once or twice a year, I'd go on tour and would get a hiatus from the malaise. Occasionally, we'd have phenomenal sex, and all our troubles would dissipate for a spell. I finally resolved to break up with you. I was working up the courage to tell you one night when you pounced on me like a mountain lion. We made out on the leather couch for a while, then you carried me to bed. In your arms, I turned into putty. You put me on the bed, peeled off my summer dress, my bra, my panties. I want to take my time with you tonight, you said. Is that okay, honey girl? Yes, please, I said. And then you went down on me for what felt like forever. After a while, I couldn't tell what you were doing. You were swirling, you were sucking, you were fingering. Your lips, your tongue, your fingers were everywhere. Suddenly, my entire body started trembling. Time stopped and stretched. I heard myself sobbing. You slowed down, but I asked you, told you, begged you to keep going. I felt nervous and excited because I wasn't sure my body was going to do, but I wanted more. I was weeping and trembling. You paused. I told you through tears that it was okay, that I'd never felt so good. You kept going, nudging me upward and upward. I saw myself at the edge of a precipice, teetering, swaying on the blade of a knife. Then, in a drawn-out whoosh, I let go. I let myself tumble. When I finally came, my orgasm flowed in endless waves, gushing and rippling, my skin an ocean of pleasure. My fingers pulsed with pleasure. My lips pulsed with pleasure. My pussy pulsed with pleasure. I felt warmth and love for you flowing through me again. My cunt was a flower in bloom. And I watched your lips and tongue milking pleasure from me. I saw honeybees buzzing in loop-de-loops nearby. I turned into water. I turned into steam. Eventually, I asked you to stop. You kissed me, your face slick with my pleasure. I was transfixed by your dimples and your freckles. I was a puddle. It's impossible to forget a night like that. It's seared in my brain. But now that night is tinged with sadness. Sadness that I can never trust you. Sadness that I never want to see you. Sadness that I miss you. Love is fucking messy. Thanks.
Well, how do I follow that up with a question? I was like, this is making me nervous as you're reading through it. I'm like, okay, what am I
Sorry.
going to ask next? No, it was awesome. I loved it. I loved it. And yeah, like I said, I love all of the sex, the love, the art, everything that's in both of your books. It's just a pleasure to read, really. So let's see here. How about when Hazel's when Tracy is actually talking to Hazel, and Hazel is saying that there's a trans collective unconscious, but that idea sounds batty to her, according to Tracy. But I wanted to sort of go into that a little bit further and ask you to sort of explain your thoughts around it, because I'm wondering if you're actually right. Is there a trans collective unconscious, that's in our minds and that maybe exists in that space where there's like a little bit of, in between that binary space? Just the on-off state, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with this idea of the collective unconscious, this trans collective unconscious, because at certain times I would have said, no, that's totally batty, and other times I would say, yeah, I see that. Right? Like I wrote this kind of longish essay called T for T Triptych, and I'll mention like 2 or 3 things that are mentioned in there that are like real things that kind of just feel batty to me, but also oddly synchronous, and that kind of thing where it happens and I'm just nodding and I'm like, yep, that checks out. Right? So like I was writing that, and around the time I was writing that, I remembered like, oh right, I was writing something around the time when I was thinking about transitioning, this piece of writing. There was me explaining to myself like how I kind of realized my like gender situation. And I remember realizing it was almost identical to something that I read in Imogen Binney's Nevada. Like it had all these dots, and she had this passage with all these dots, this constellation of dots. Right? And I feel like there are a number of those things that I have seen, I could say like 10, 20, probably 50 times in the writing of other writers. And like one of the writers who came out to one of our events, I remember like co-wrote a piece for Autostraddle about Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian about a year after it came out, when I was actually writing this T for T triptych. And they were talking about, at the beginning, one of them is saying like, I don't see myself in this book. And then by the end of the conversation, like, I see too much of myself in this book. It's embarrassing me and it's making me feel less unique. Because it's these things that I thought were just me, actually maybe this is something that other folks also feel. And I remember when I was writing that essay, T for T Triptych, I'd finished the first draft. I emailed another writer who I adore, who I love, who I've never met in my life, who I've never exchanged work with. But for some reason I was like, she's the right person to email about this. And I emailed her and said, hey, I've written this essay called T for T Triptych. Would you mind taking a look at it? I really don't know her very well. And she messages back and says, I think we're on the same wavelength, Hazel. I just wrote a series of poems called T for T Triptych. And I was just like, yeah, that checks out. It just felt like, it felt right to me. And increasingly when that happens, I'm just like, yeah, like there is like a cat who goes into space that's mentioned in this book here, this artist named Felicette. And around the same time, like Kai Cheng Tom had a book that came out about the first dog that went into space, a children's book. And I was just like nodding, and I'm like, there's a lot of donuts in here. Oh, I will say this before I forget as well. I have these like donut postcards that I printed up called Instructions for Eating a Donut that I'm like happy to give away at the end of this reading. If you come over, feel free to like snag 1 or 2 or 3 and mail them off to folks. But there's, this donut thing, and then Rika Aoki's book has a whole bunch of like donuts. Like it's just this thing of where I'm just like, yeah, I think we were getting a similar signal, but just interpreting it in a different way. So I think like, I don't know, I would say, yeah, this checks out. I think it's true. I think I have verifiable evidence. I just haven't gotten my article peer-reviewed yet.
That could take a while.
Wait 2 years
Yeah.
with bated breath. What does bated breath mean? I don't even know. Anyway.
So now this is perfect because I know how to follow this up. It's the lightning round questions for you both, and we were going to go over these earlier in the green room, but we got sidetracked.
Had
So
to pee,
here we
that's
go.
probably why, yeah.
And the first one, of course, is favorite donut.
Oh shit, I'm gonna go with the cruller. It's got that eggy, it has like just the texture of it. Yeah. Yes, I feel like this is, I don't know if I've had all this many yeahs at readings. I remember when I mentioned detachable penis at another event, somebody was like, yeah. I was like, fuck yeah. as long as there's no projectiles being thrown at me when I mentioned detachable
There
peanuts.
must be like Peanuts donuts. So
There
maybe
are.
there's
Yeah,
like
there
a
were Voodoo
combination
Donut in
of-
Portland.
Voodoo,
Okay,
yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Oh,
yeah. It's called the Cock and Balls.
Is this your favorite, or is the Old Dirty Bastard? This is like, they have all of these donuts there.
I really liked the one that had like Fruit Loops on them. Yeah, that's pretty good. Or like chocolate peanut butter Oreo crumble.
Yes,
That was
yes.
So good. Yeah.
Okay, next lightning round question. Celebrity you'd bonk.
The White Stripes.
Bjork.
Okay. Woo. Writer you'd go to an amusement park with.
Writer I'd go to an amusement park with. Dang.
You can always just say pass.
No, definitely not
Okay.
passing on this one.
I'll say Ross Gay, since I'm currently reading the Book of Delights. I think that would be like a delightful day out.
Samuel Delaney.
Okay, artwork that leaves you breathless.
I have to give a plug for my best friend in the world, Sybil Lamb. She is this trans artist whose work is just like chaotic and anarchic and like feral but beautiful. I remember like someone once described her as someone like some like video where like somebody's like walking in a forest barefoot and every step they take, half the plants around them die and the other half like plants like spring up in their wake, like some sort of like witch. And like her artwork feels that way as well. And she's done the cover for a couple of my books, not this one, but this one, but the other two. So Sybil Lamb.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that's coming to mind for me is like David Hockney, especially some of his like later works that are just really huge, like his like kind of like Yorkshire paintings or whatever that are just, yeah, stunning.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. What about favorite reality TV show? Oh, I like how your eyes
know if
both
I've
at the
seen-
same
I don't-
time are just like, this could take us a while.
I will. So I'm going to ask. I'm going to caveat. I'm going to preempt. I'm going to caveat my answer by saying I apologize for sounding like some insufferable snot in the '90s. I don't really watch TV. Okay. But I don't. So I don't have an answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what I've even, I don't know. I wish I had, I will say like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the answer would have been Top Chef.
Okay, okay.
I'm not sure what it is now.
Okay. What about least favorite writing genre?
Least favorite writing genre? To read or to write?
I guess to read.
Cookbooks. I don't like cooking.
Okay.
I think it's such a hard question because honestly, I think anything that doesn't like, I don't know, like any form I think you could do well, it would be similar to like, what's your least favorite musical form? And I'm like, I don't know, like there are some really great, yeah, so I know this is lightning round and I've just been struck by lightning.
Okay. Well, what about this one? I think this one might be easier for both of you. What are you listening to right now?
What was on my? What was I listening to as I got? Purity Ring. Yeah, yeah. Some fans, yeah.
I've been listening to The National, like the new album a bit. Yeah.
All right, great. Okay, beach or pool?
Wait, what?
Beach or pool? Beach or pool?
Pool.
I would. There was a gasp, an audible gasp. I would have said.
Just saying the
pool.
hard truths around here, no big deal. Just being really brave. Sorry, I cut you
No,
off.
I think I was totally a pool person, not a pool person, but not a beach person. And now I feel like I've been really converted to ocean swimming, like something about being held by the ocean. Also, Agnes Varda, who I would also, I would woo her all day. If only she was still alive, she would be the celebrity I would bonk. The exhumed corpse of Agnes Varda. Hazel took it for a left turn there. Shit.
It is good to know you have boundaries, Hazel. Okay, now, Casey, you wanted me to ask, and I think this is a good thing. What about this tour name, Plett and Plant? What is going on with this?
So, I mean, like, Plett and Plant, I think we kind of, like, started, I was like, this kind of sounds like a small-town law firm, like, and then, like, I think you were like, yeah, like a transsexual detective agency.
That one could get some Netflix funding. I think, like, that sounds great to me.
Right? Exactly.
Transsexuals can solve anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, you, like, coming in the door, like, Plett, I think we got another one, like. pulling from a flask of whiskey, like, all right, Plante, it's time to suit up
Exactly.
again.
All the flaws. Think of all the flaws we could have.
Exactly. It'd be so good. It'd be so good.
Which one is drunker?
I know. Yeah. Find out this week. Yeah. Free idea. I mean, except not. Like, come to us. We'll, right.
Yeah, royalties.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll write the pilot.
Okay, well, I think we're coming up to 8 o'clock, so we did want to save some time, obviously, for audience questions, because I'm sure a lot of you hopefully have questions out there. Anybody with a question in the audience, the live audience? Yes.
I'm gonna pull it up on my notes because I'm gonna be stumbling kind of otherwise. I just started reading this trans poetry anthology called We Want It All, which is awesome. And then in the preface, there's this quote which kind of affected me. I guess it's a very old quote, but from Vivian, which is that autobiography is the only discourse in which transsexuals are permitted to speak. And the preface goes on to ask what poetic modes make it possible for us to speak in the first person while refusing or transmuting the force of that imperative to a singular autobiography. How does trans poetics refute the singularity of so many private narratives and work towards forms of collective knowledge? And I guess it's trans writers, the less wordy question, just how we feel about autobiography, autofiction even, and what its value is to ourselves, our communities, and also what it feels like its limitations are. And for myself, I feel that's been what I felt I wanted to write when I was in my very baby trans body. It's okay, I hate my body, dysphoria poem, confessional dysphoria poem, et cetera, or just transition narratives, but feeling nowadays more disaffected from that, or wanting to write different things. Also just a fatigue of being trans that I think pervades that sometimes. And yeah, I guess just thoughts on, I guess especially for fiction, autofiction.
So just kind of briefly encapsulate little bits of that. I'm sure you caught more of it than I did. But it's about the trans poetry anthology, We Want It All, and how you feel about autofiction and its limitations, and then the forums around that, and sort of about the autobiography that transsexuals, trans people, can actually, write across. And so maybe you want to answer any parts of those. Yeah.
I'd love to. Yeah, do you mind if I go first? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Those are real things, and they're tough. There's a couple things that I think there's two things that I want to say. One is that there's this really awesome, Rika actually, there's something Rika Aoki said a while ago. There's this old panel on trans fiction called Staking Our Claim that happened in the fall of 2012. It's her, Imogen Red Durkin, and Donna Ostrowski, rest in peace. And it's from 10 years ago. It's on YouTube. It's easy to find. Go find it. It's fascinating to watch in this respect. And something that Rika said is she said something I've never really expected to be able to speak to the world. I've never asked for it to speak to me. I don't think that can happen. I think it's dangerous to even want to or expect that it's going to happen. I'm gonna have to paraphrase her. I don't remember her exact wording, but she says something these surprising things can happen that could all of a sudden just do this. And I think for me, for fiction especially, even though there are some certain, if you know me, and even if you just don't know me, but you know some basic things about me, and if you look at my books, you can kind of go, oh, so this and this and this and this. And the thing is that something that I love so much about being a fiction writer that I treasure very, very deeply, is that there are things about my own story, and there are things about my autobiography, and there are things that have happened to me in my life that no one is going to get to know about, and that gets to stay private and for me. And sometimes they have affected things that are in there, but I am the only one who knows how it goes. And that is private, and it will stay private forever. Even though I get to work in this very public mode, it feels so extremely special, and I don't have to explain it to anybody. Because Vivian Namaste was right. You know, I mean, she was about a lot of stuff. And so that's what I think about when I think about that quote that you mentioned. And I think what the power that lets us do within our work is that it lets us move in this very free kind of like open thing, because like, you know, that in other modes, like you said, a kind of like the confessional dysphoric poem or like the autobiography that do feel so like kind of trapped, or there's like no way out. And fiction kind of feels to me like this trap door where like no one gets to follow me there, and it's one of the most beautiful things in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of that for sure. I mean, I think there's this like, especially for me in fiction, there's this like, yeah, things can be kind of transmuted in a way. I mean, I think a lot about like, I don't know, telling the truth but telling it slant, the Emily Dickinson line, or the title of the Pavement album, Slanted and Enchanted. I feel like there's a lot of things that have happened to me that I can kind of like launder or shift or kind of move through in fiction in a way. And I can also create different possibilities that don't exist, right? Like I think this is one of the things I was trying to do specifically with this book, Any Other City, is to have just a lot of scenes of specifically trans femmes hanging out, experiencing pleasure, having a certain amount of ease, not having this looming sense that the world doesn't want them to exist, and just like not putting that in the fucking book. Because I want to be able to like exist in that world myself. I want to write into a world that I want to exist, that I want to kind of bring into being. That feels really deeply important to me, and feels like a witchy practice in a way too, that feels necessary. Yeah, and I think fiction can afford that space, and there are certain things that like, in a way, the structure of this book is kind of like dealing with this idea of the palimpsest, of things like being overlaid, like even the city that it takes place in, like you'll be sitting in a place and you're like, oh, this used to be a swimming pool. But I still know it's a swimming pool, and I feel similarly about things like my body, but also I feel similarly about my past. I feel similarly about having lived, I was gonna say a life, but really multiple lives, like several lives that are kind of stacked on top of each other, a bit like a layer cake. And some of those little bits or kernels or Fruit Loops or walnuts or whatever can be kind of put in here and kind of baked into a new thing, right? Because what is a recipe but a spell for transformation, right? So you're taking all these ingredients and you're making something new out of them, and it's kind of like folding these things in. There are some things in here, like, example, there's something I thought when I was like 8 or 9 that's probably one of the most shameful things I remember thinking as a child, and I was like, I'm gonna put this in the head of my narrator. Just put it in my book here. And like in a way that can soften things, right? In the way that like writing fiction can actually change how I feel being in my body. That feels really fucking wondrous to me, you know? So I think that's one of the things that fiction can do for someone who's writing it, or someone who's reading it, I think, as well, too, right? Is it can afford you different possibilities instead of just this idea of the memoir. Although I think there are some really fantastic and super interesting memoirs that are playing with that form and also doing inventive things, whether it's, you know, memoir, autofiction, or what have you. Yeah, hopefully that's, yeah. Thanks.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
Advice to aspiring trans femme novelists.
Well, that one's easy for me to quote again. So it's advice for aspiring femme novelists. Sorry, trans femme. Oh, I even screwed that up.
Follow the energy of what's really meaningful to you. And I know that seems like it should be kind of like, well, duh. But it's actually amazing how many things can get inside your head, I think, to screw that up and to make it like and interfere with those things. And I think these are things that like any artist deals with. You're like, oh, well, like, is anyone going to like this, or should this be really like? But I feel like there's kind of like a certain flavor of like acceleration on that, like when you're trans and writing. But most of the things that I have made in my life that I've gotten to do this have come from like following an energy that I didn't quite understand, as weird or strange as it was, and just sort of like having faith that when I was done that I would figure out things to do with it. And then of course, like, you know, I've been really lucky, I've been really fortunate, and like a lot of that has just been like luck and privilege. But making the stuff itself, follow the strange energy, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I would say very much the same thing. I think you sometimes have the sense that there's something, but you don't always know what it is, and you start kind of like digging at it a bit or kind of picking at it and being willing to let a thing get weird. Like, I feel like this is one of those things where sometimes we're like, I want to tell a story and I want to have a plot. I don't really write in plots. Like, I think this book was started as 2 Post-it notes. One was like side A, one was side B. Some of them were just words like wonder, desire, anger, this kind of, you know, this kind of thing or whatever. And it's like, I don't know why, but I'm seeing a falcon and I'm going to write about a falcon. And then just kind of going with that and being like, I can also edit it later. Like, again, I think of Yoko Ono a lot. And one of the ways I think of her is doing cut piece, which is where you're literally inviting people from the audience. And she's like a Japanese woman inviting people from the audience who often wound up being white men to take scissors and cut parts of her clothing off, right? And that's a piece, and I think it's saying a lot of different things about, you know, she's also someone who lived through the bombing of Hiroshima and all of these other things, and I think it's doing a lot of different things, but that takes real in-your-body bravery, standing in front of a room full, an audience full of like 20,000, 40,000 people and singing when you know that most of those people don't want you to sing. That takes bravery. Me sitting down and tapping something out on my laptop that I can also edit later, I'm willing to kind of let the kite string keep going, right? Like, where does this thing want to be? I remember the only way I kind of wrote like Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian was like, I'd been mostly writing poetry before then, and then I was like, what would be the book if I was to walk into a bookstore and I saw it? I'd be like, somebody's been reading my fucking mind. This is like everything that I think about. Like, it's all the weird, fucked up shit. I was just like, what if I had a book that was just all the stuff that kind of makes me me? Or that kind of feels like it just has little kernels of this, that, and the other, and being willing to let it be weird and not worry if it makes sense to other people. My experience is the more particular and the more specific a thing is, the more somebody is like, I haven't read anyone talking about this before. This means something to me, right? So I think that would be part of my advice too, is to be willing to like go to places, because again, you can edit. Like, it's not like you're doing it in front of people, which is one of the beautiful things, I think.
I remember somebody telling me that I had a teacher was like, you know, no one's ever going to make you publish something. And like, I feel like that weird, like, oh yeah, and I like, it's weird how like locked up or kind of like anxious I could be, especially like earlier on. I feel like, you know, the computer's like, you get to be the person who decides when someone sees this every single time, like every single time, like, and it's weird how easy it is to forget that, but then how freeing it is when you don't.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm glad you mentioned Yoko Ono. I mean, obviously, Yoko Ono is one of my favorite artists, too. You know, the little grapefruit book that she did. Love that. Seen a lot of her work in New York, too, and I do agree with you that she's just been brave throughout the years. Like, you know, people have really tried to cut her down a lot, and she endures, and I think she's just way ahead of her time, basically, as an artist. There's one final question here that I have from the online audience, and you might have answered some of this already, but do you base your characters on yourself or real people you've met, or make them up entirely? Do you worry about past lovers reading your work, or do you hope they will? Is that a pass?
What was the first one? The first part of that question seemed much easier to answer than the second part. Second part is a fucking humdinger.
It's true.
I didn't ask for the anal probe.
It just said, do you base your characters on yourself or real people you've met, or make them up entirely? And then your favorite part of the question was, do you worry about past lovers reading your work, or do you hope they will?
I can start this.
Sure, please.
So, I mean, based on characters, I mean, like, yeah, like sometimes and often it's sort of like it'll kind of like start with like an observation, like or a voice, and like kind of like eventually it's sort of like through the course of the writing, it like becomes another kind of like whole person. There were two characters in my most recent new book, A Dream of a Woman. There were two characters who were modeled very, very closely off these two people that I've known for a very long time. Enough to the point that for the first time, I actually emailed them like, "Hey, like, I just want you to know, like, it's happening." And I was nervous about it. And the cool thing is, they were both like, "I trust you. Like, it's cool," which I found very, very touching. Especially because one of them did a lot of not great things, but the character, not the person. Yeah, and so sometimes, but I also like to like varying degrees, and to like and not all the time. It's also kind of makes me kind of like, and one of the reasons why I don't want to be more detailed or specific about that, because I've said this before, so Hazel's heard me say the same thing a few times on this tour, but like there's a kind of alchemy, I think, to how that process works, and there's something really special to me about not wanting to reveal it, which is maybe kind of goes to this like trapdoor thing that I was talking about earlier, where like the degree to which and the scale to which it's like true or not, or how these things are, it's like I think it would take away from like the magic of it for me to like just even like as like a reader. Like I feel like I remember like, I mean again, like politically there are things which I feel that way about like being a trans artist that I don't want to give into, again, like the autobiographical imperative, and that feels really important to me politically. But then also just like as any kind of artist, I don't know, I remember like being like younger and like reading a book and I would love it, yeah, you know, or even just any kind of art, narrative art. And then I would find something from the artist who would be like, yes, so that is based off this thing that happened exactly this way. I'm like, oh, come on, man, like, way to take the magic out of it, you know? Like, screw you, like, you didn't have to tell me that. Anyway, notice how I'm like skillfully avoiding the second part of the question, by the way. I just like some recognition of that. Thank you very much, thank you. Yeah. Oh, you shouldn't have. Oh, you're all too kind, you're all too kind. And to answer the second question, like, what was it again? Do I worry about it? Do I worry about?
Do you worry about it, or do you want them to read it?
I worry about it, and I don't want them to read it. No more. That's my answer. There's no more. There's no more.
Yeah, I mean, I think alchemy is the thing. I mean, I think it really is kind of the stew of all of those. I mean, things, again, it's that following the energy, and you don't know what the kernel of a thing is going to be. And then you're like, there's a there. And then maybe that little pebble becomes something more, and it becomes like a conglomerate rock, and then it becomes a Rice Krispie square. And like all of these different sort of, and it starts to kind of coalesce into a thing, but you don't know, and hopefully it's not just you, right? Hopefully it's not just like, here's a thing that happened to me and I'm gonna change the names of things. I don't think anything I've ever written has any of the flavor of that, because once I start writing a thing, typically I feel like part of my work is to get out of the way. I'm like, it's not about me, it's like, what is going on here? Like, what does the work wanna become? Like, how do I, and maybe that's partly too, I've been like this kind of like what I would call like a good enough Zen Buddhist for like maybe a bit over 25 years. And a lot of it to me is like, how do I get my ego out of the way? Like I remember telling somebody who interviewed me a little while ago that I would be really, and this is true, I'd be really delighted if this book existed and like there's this one page that says, any other city, a memoir, with Tracy St here in big letters, and then in a tiny font, with Hazel Jane Plante. I would be so happy if that was like, say 100 years from now, let's say there are still humans, hypothetically. And this book were somehow still around and it was like Tracy St Cyr's name was on it, I would be delighted, you know, rolling in my grave and having sex with Agnes Varda. I don't even know why I'm throwing that in. It's become a bit. Speaking of which, this question about exes reading your work or whatever, or was it something like that? I don't know. I don't know that I have some like trepidation around that stuff, and now instead of, I'll kind of dodge it by saying a bit of a funny thing, where there's someone who I dated during the pandemic, and I remember who is this like tomboy, this troubled tomboy. I'll just say hot but troubled tomboy. I'll just say that. This hot but troubled tomboy who was also sort of a, what's that, snuffleupagus? Snuffleupagus, right, who no one's ever seen before. No one in my life has ever met this person because it was during a peak pandemic. And I'm like, I think that happened. But I do remember at the end of that, when the person had like read some of my work and knew I was a writer, I remember the parting line that was said to me was, "Don't write about how I fuck."
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It wasn't the most, what I don't even know what to say about that, but
Yeah.
don't write about how I fuck. None of
Wow.
that is in this book here, exactly.
Oh, okay. That reminds me. Have you ever read
Transmuted, though, perhaps.
Alchemy, right? Yeah. Okay, have you ever read Black Wave by Michelle T?
I own it, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, okay. I won't spoil some of it. Yeah.
If you need to spoil a thing, spoil a thing.
Wait, was
Mild
that a do it
spoiler.
was that a do it or don't do it? No,
Okay.
yeah. If you want to know what my thing is, you'll have to. If you bought 8 copies of my book, then afterwards, then I will tell you. I was going to bring this
Oh,
up.
it's up to 8 now.
Inflation.
A baker's dozen.
Baker's dozen.
This
Yeah.
is not a grocery store. Thank you so much, Casey and Hazel, for such a fun and engaging discussion tonight. Thank you both for making more room for trans fiction, of course, in the world of literature, and for bringing your authentic selves to the stage tonight. I hope that you will finally take a bit of time out for some R&R. Big thanks as well to Leslie and Zoe for blessing me with this opportunity to be up on stage today. Thanks as well to everyone at the Writers' Fest and the VPL, and of course to all of you for joining us tonight. Now, libraries are notoriously slow for acquiring books, which we know into the collection, and Casey's new edition and Hazel's new book are not available yet at the VPL. So I encourage you, again, to purchase them tonight to support these 2 amazing writers. Mary Ann is over at the Black Bond table there selling them, so rush on over. And Casey and Hazel will also be at the signing table, and you can walk over there and say hi to them. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Candy.
Take care.
Thank you, Candy.